I was 28 when my doorbell rang at 2 a.m. in March. My husband Thomas had left for a year-long work assignment in Europe just 2 weeks earlier, so I was alone when Janet showed up with Hunter, Annie, and Grace huddled behind her. Each kid had a single black trash bag of clothes. Janet handed me a crumpled envelope. She told me they were mine now, that she needed a break. Then she turned and walked to a waiting car. The kids watched silently as their mother drove away. The envelope contained unsigned guardianship papers she'd printed from some website. I knew they had no legal value, but I was too shocked to think clearly that night. I called the police immediately. They took a report but said since the children weren't in immediate danger and were with family, this wasn't considered abandonment in the legal sense. They advised me to contact Child Protective Services in the morning, which I did. CPS opened a case right away. A caseworker named Scott came to inspect my one-bedroom apartment that afternoon. He explained I could apply for emergency kinship care status while they tried to locate Janet. This would give me temporary legal authority and some financial assistance. The first night, all 3 kids slept in my bed while I took the couch. Hunter didn't sleep at all. He sat up watching the door until morning. Annie cried silently. Grace wet the bed. The CPS caseworker helped me get emergency enrollment for the kids at the local school, though they required birth certificates and proper documentation within 30 days. Thomas video called that night, visibly shaken by what had happened. He offered to come home, but his contract had severe penalties for early termination. We decided he should stay. The school counselor immediately reported back to CPS when she noticed Grace had been coming to school unwashed for weeks before arriving at my home. Hunter hadn't turned in homework in months. Annie had been stealing food from other kids' lunches. By month 3, despite the small stipend from the kinship care program, I'd depleted my savings. I took a second job working nights when the kids were asleep. Scott from CPS arranged for licensed childcare when needed. I still only slept about 4 hours a night. I finally tracked down Janet's ex-boyfriend Damien. He told me she'd met a 19-year-old at a bar. They'd gone to Vegas. According to him, she felt the kids were holding her back. Thomas's calls became less frequent. His project had complications. He'd be staying in Europe longer than planned, maybe another 6 months. After 6 months with no word from Janet, I filed for permanent custody with the help of a pro bono lawyer from a family advocacy center. The first court date came in September. Janet didn't show. The judge continued the case, requiring more efforts to locate her. The guardian ad litem presented her initial findings, recommending I keep temporary custody while the search continued. After the third missed hearing in December, the judge finally granted me full legal custody. The entire process had taken 9 months. In June, 15 months after she left, Hunter called me mom for the first time. The others followed. By the 18-month mark, Grace couldn't remember what Janet looked like. When I showed her a photo, she said, "That's not my mommy. You're my mommy." Thomas and I were growing apart, barely speaking once a month now. When he did call, he'd ask strange questions about whether I'd heard from Janet. Then, 2 years and 2 months after she'd left, Janet showed up at the kids' school. She was drunk, screaming at the front office that I'd stolen her babies. The school followed their safety protocol, calling both me and the police. She was arrested for public intoxication. I got a restraining order the next day. That night, she tried to break into our apartment at 3 a.m. The kids woke up terrified. Hunter stood in front of his sisters with a baseball bat. I called 911. Janet was arrested again, but released the next morning. I tried calling Thomas repeatedly for support. He didn't pick up for days. When he finally called back, he sounded strange, distant, said he couldn't talk long. Janet filed a petition to overturn my custody, claiming she'd changed and deserved her children back. The court scheduled a hearing and ordered supervised visitation assessment. When the kids saw her at the visitation center, all 3 had panic attacks. The supervisor terminated the visit immediately. 3 weeks ago, Janet filed a report with CPS claiming I was abusing the kids. Our familiar caseworker Scott came to investigate, along with a new colleague. They interviewed each child, checked the apartment, reviewed school and therapy records. The case was quickly dismissed as unfounded, but the damage was done. The kids were terrified they'd be taken away. Then Janet cornered me in the parking lot after work. She wasn't drunk this time. She looked pregnant. She told me she wanted her kids back. Her boyfriend had left her and she needed them now. I told her the kids were finally stable, that they had been legally adopted by me now, that she couldn't disappear for 2 years and expect to walk back into their lives. I noticed her stomach and asked who the father was. She smiled. "Your husband." I couldn't process what Janet said. My husband? Thomas? The father of her baby? Before I could even respond, Janet started laughing. This horrible, smug laugh that made my blood boil. She pulled out her phone and showed me texts between her and Thomas going back over a year. Apparently, they'd been in contact this whole time. While I was staying up all night with her traumatized children, she was texting with my husband. I told her she was full of shit, that Thomas wouldn't do that. But my hands were shaking so bad I could barely get my keys out. Janet just kept talking, saying how Thomas had been sending her money, how they'd meet up whenever he flew back to the States for business trips I didn't even know about. I just got in my car and locked the doors. Janet stood there banging on my window, screaming that she was going to tell everyone how I stole her kids and her man. I drove away with her still yelling in the rearview mirror. When I got home, the kids were with our neighbor who'd been watching them while I worked. I managed to keep it together until she left. Then I went to the bathroom, turned on the shower, and just sat on the floor crying. How could Thomas do this? We'd been together for 6 years before all this happened. After the kids were asleep, I called Thomas. No answer. I texted, "Janet says you're the father of her baby. Call me now." At 3 a.m., Thomas finally called back. I didn't even say hello. Is Janet pregnant with your baby? He was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then he just said he was sorry, that it wasn't supposed to happen like this. I lost it. I was screaming so loud I had to shove my face in a pillow so I wouldn't wake the kids. How long had this been going on? How could he do this to me while I was raising her children that she abandoned? Thomas said it started before he left for Europe. Janet had contacted him, said she needed money. He met up with her to give her some cash, and things happened. He swore it was just supposed to be a one-time thing, but then they kept talking. I asked if that's why his project in Europe kept getting extended. He admitted there was no extension. He just couldn't face coming home after what he'd done. Then he had the nerve to ask if the kids were okay, like he actually cared. I hung up on him. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those nights I was struggling to comfort 3 traumatized children while he was texting their mother, about how he'd been lying to me for years. The next morning, Hunter found me at the kitchen table still in yesterday's clothes. This kid has been through so much, but he sat down next to me and asked if I was okay. I tried to smile and said I was just tired. Hunter looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Is she trying to take us away again?" These kids. They're so perceptive it breaks my heart. I promised him that nobody was taking them anywhere, that this was their home and I was their mom now, legally and in every way that mattered. I called my lawyer as soon as the office opened, explained everything Janet had said about Thomas. My lawyer was shocked but said this actually strengthened my case. It showed Janet's continued instability and poor judgment. She suggested I file for divorce immediately and document everything. That afternoon, Janet showed up at our apartment complex again. This time she was shouting in the parking lot, telling everyone who could hear that I'd stolen her husband. One of our neighbors called the building security. When they tried to escort her out, she started screaming that she was going to get her kids back and there was nothing I could do about it. Hunter and the girls were at school, thank God, but the whole incident was recorded on the building's security cameras. My lawyer said this was perfect evidence of Janet's continued erratic behavior. I decided to be proactive. I emailed Thomas with a list of demands. 1. Sign divorce papers. 2. Give up any claim to the children. 3. Provide a recorded statement confirming his relationship with Janet and her abandonment of the kids. I told him if he didn't comply, I'd make sure his company knew what kind of person they had working for them. Harsh? Maybe. But I was done being nice. That night, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Damien, Janet's ex. He'd heard Janet was back and causing trouble. He wanted to warn me that when Janet was with him, she'd talk about getting her kids back someday. Not because she wanted them, but because she wanted the government benefits that came with them. He offered to testify about this if needed. The next day was Friday. I took a personal day from work and met with my lawyer to file the divorce papers. Afterward, I went to the school and updated their emergency contact information, explicitly stating that Janet was not authorized to pick up the kids under any circumstances. The principal pulled me aside. Apparently, Janet had called the school twice more, demanding information about the children's schedules. They'd refused to provide anything, but he wanted me to know they were taking this situation seriously. They'd instructed all staff to call police immediately if Janet showed up again. I was walking back to my car when Scott from CPS called. Janet had filed another report, this time claiming I was turning the children against her. Scott sounded exhausted. He said they were required to investigate, but he wanted to do it with minimal disruption to the kids. Could he come by the apartment that evening? When Scott arrived, he brought his supervisor, Brenda. They interviewed each child separately in their bedroom while I waited anxiously in the living room. Afterward, Brenda told me the case would be closed immediately. Not only were the allegations clearly false, but Grace had told them she didn't remember Janet at all, and Hunter had expressed fear of her. Brenda took me aside and said something off the record. CPS was building a case against Janet for harassment through false reporting. If she filed one more false report, they would pursue action against her. That night, Annie had a nightmare. She crawled into bed with me, her little body shaking. She asked if the scary lady was going to take her away. I held her and promised I wouldn't let that happen. The next morning, I woke up to 37 text messages from Thomas. After initially agreeing to my demands, he'd changed his mind. He said Janet had been calling him non-stop, threatening to tell his employer everything unless he helped her get the kids back. He was scared of losing his job, his reputation. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the messages to my lawyer. That afternoon, while the kids were at their therapy session, I met with a financial advisor. Thomas and I had joint accounts, and I needed to protect myself. The advisor helped me open new accounts in just my name and suggested steps to secure my finances before the divorce proceedings. When we got home from therapy, there was a package on our doorstep. It was addressed to the kids, no return address. Inside were 3 brand new tablets with a note, "For my babies, Mommy loves you, I'll see you soon." I was furious. I immediately called my lawyer, who advised me to document everything but not to give the tablets to the kids. This was a clear violation of the restraining order. On Monday morning, I got a call from the courthouse. The judge wanted an emergency hearing due to the escalating situation. It was scheduled for Wednesday. Tuesday night, I was putting the kids to bed when my phone rang. It was Thomas again. This time, he sounded different, scared. He said Janet was becoming increasingly unstable. She'd shown up at his company's European office making a scene in the lobby. Security had escorted her out, but not before she'd told several colleagues that Thomas had abandoned his pregnant girlfriend. I asked Thomas why Janet would fly all the way to Europe when she was supposedly fighting to get her kids back here. He hesitated, then admitted something that made my blood run cold. Janet wasn't actually pregnant. She'd been lying about that too. using it to manipulate both of us. And there was more. Thomas had never actually slept with Janet. Yes, he'd been sending her money, which was bad enough. But the relationship Janet had described was a complete fabrication. I didn't know whether to believe him. Why would he admit to sending her money if he was going to deny the affair? It didn't make sense. Then Thomas said something that stopped me cold. The reason he'd been sending Janet money wasn't because they were having an affair. It was because she was blackmailing him. According to Thomas, Janet had caught him in a compromising situation with a co-worker at a company party before he left for Europe. Nothing had actually happened, but the photos she took made it look bad. Really bad. She'd threatened to send them to me and his boss if he didn't pay her. I was stunned. If this was true, it meant Thomas had been trying to protect his job and our marriage in his own misguided way. But it also meant he'd been lying to me for 2 years while I struggled to care for 3 traumatized children. I told Thomas I needed proof. He promised to send everything. Screenshots of threats, bank transfers, everything. At the emergency hearing on Wednesday, my lawyer presented all the evidence of Janet's harassment. The scene at school, the break-in attempt, the gifts sent to the children, the false CPS reports, the social media posts. The judge extended the restraining order and ordered Janet to undergo a psychiatric evaluation before any further custody proceedings. As we were leaving the courthouse, Janet was waiting in the parking lot. She started screaming that we were all liars, that Thomas had promised they would be together. A bailiff had to physically restrain her as she lunged toward me. That night, Thomas sent everything he'd promised. Hundreds of threatening texts from Janet, records of money transfers, even the original blackmail photos she'd used. They showed Thomas at a company party, drunk, with his arm around a female co-worker. They were just talking, but the angle made it look intimate. Janet had captioned them with lies about an affair that never happened. I was in shock. Part of me was relieved that Thomas hadn't betrayed me in the way I'd thought, but I was also furious that he'd kept this secret for so long. All those months of struggling alone, thinking he was just becoming distant, when actually he was being blackmailed. I showed everything to my lawyer the next day. She was as shocked as I was, but said this changed everything. With this evidence, we could push for termination of Janet's parental rights completely. We could also potentially pursue criminal charges for extortion. When I got home that evening, Hunter was waiting for me. He'd overheard part of my phone conversation with the lawyer. This kid, only 11 years old but so grown up in so many ways, asked me directly, "Is my real mom trying to take us away for money?" I sat down with him and tried to explain the situation in terms he could understand, that sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, and that his biological mother had done that, but that I was his mom now, and I would never let anyone take him or his sisters away. That night, I got an email from Thomas. Janet had been arrested trying to use a stolen credit card at a hotel near our apartment. The next morning, I woke up to breaking news. Thomas was flying back. He'd finally told his company everything, and they'd put him on immediate leave to deal with the situation. He'd be landing tomorrow. I had no idea how to feel about seeing him again. Part of me wanted to scream at him for lying for so long. Another part understood he'd been trying to protect himself and us from Janet's blackmail. But one thing was absolutely clear. These children were mine now. I'd been there through the nightmares, the therapy appointments, the school projects, the stomach flus. I'd held them when they cried for a mother who didn't want them. I'd built a family from the broken pieces Janet had left behind, and nobody, not Janet, not Thomas, not anyone, was going to take that away from me. I just had no idea what Thomas was planning to say when he arrived, or what Janet might do next, or whether I could ever trust my husband again after 2 years of lies. All I knew was that tomorrow would bring Thomas face to face with me and the children he'd been trying to protect from afar, and I had absolutely no idea what would happen next. Update. Hi everyone, I can't respond to everyone, but I'm reading all your comments. And yes, I'll give Hunter a high five from all of you. I spent all night cleaning the apartment like a maniac. Not because I wanted things nice for Thomas, but because I couldn't sleep and needed something to do with all my rage. By 5 a.m., even the baseboards were spotless, and I still hadn't decided if I was going to let him explain himself or just serve him divorce papers at the door. Hunter found me scrubbing the inside of the refrigerator when he woke up. Smart kid just silently started helping, wiping down shelves without asking questions. After a while, he said, "So Thomas is coming home today?" And I couldn't lie to him. These kids had been lied to enough. I told him yes, and that we had some things to figure out as a family. Hunter just nodded and said, "We're still going to be okay though, right?" And I promised him we would be, no matter what happened with Thomas. The kids went to school and I sat at the kitchen table staring at my phone. Thomas had texted his flight details. He'd be landing at 2:30 p.m. I didn't respond, just took the day off work and waited. Scott from CPS called mid-morning with an update. Janet was still in jail, but she'd made a call to our Aunt Margaret, who was now talking about coming to help sort things out. Scott warned me that Aunt Margaret had never been in the picture before, but legally she could potentially cause problems if she wanted to stir up trouble. Great. Just what we needed. Another family member suddenly interested in these kids after years of silence. When Thomas's Uber pulled up outside our apartment, I watched from the window. He looked terrible. I let him knock 3 times before opening the door. We just stared at each other for a moment, neither of us knowing what to say. Then he started crying. Actual tears. In 6 years, I'd never seen Thomas cry, not even at his father's funeral. I didn't invite him in right away. I told him we needed to talk, but not inside where the kids could come home and see us fighting. So we sat on the steps outside the building, with Thomas's suitcase between us like a barrier. He showed me everything on his phone, all the blackmail messages from Janet. It had started innocently enough. Janet had contacted him asking for money shortly after dumping the kids with me. He'd felt guilty, like it was somehow his fault that his sister-in-law was such a mess. So he gave her some cash to help her get back on her feet. But Janet kept asking for more. When Thomas tried to cut her off, she revealed she had those photos from his company holiday party. They weren't really incriminating, just him looking drunk with his arm around a female coworker. But Janet had threatened to send them to his boss with a made-up story about an affair, along with other rumors that could damage his career. So he paid, and kept paying. Even after moving to Europe, he kept the money flowing to keep Janet quiet and away from the kids. He was afraid that if she came back, she would take the children and disappear just to spite me. I asked him why he didn't just tell me about the blackmail. He said he was ashamed, afraid I would think less of him for being so stupid, afraid I would blame him for giving Janet money in the first place, when I was struggling so hard to take care of her abandoned children. I did blame him for lying, for letting me think he was just growing distant when actually he was being drained by my sister's blackmail, for not trusting me enough to tell me the truth. We could have fought Janet together 2 years ago instead of me facing this nightmare alone. After about an hour of talking outside, I finally let Thomas come in. He looked around at all the changes, the bunk beds visible through the kids' bedroom door, the homework charts on the fridge, the family photos that didn't include him. He picked up a frame showing me and the kids at their school art show. His face crumpled again, realizing how much he'd miss. I told him he could sleep on the couch, that the kids would be home from school soon, and we needed to present a united front for them, whatever we decided about our marriage. Thomas nodded, looking relieved that I wasn't kicking him out immediately. When the kids got home, their reactions to seeing Thomas were complicated. Grace, who'd been only 3 when he left, barely remembered him. She hid behind my legs, peering out suspiciously. Annie gave him an awkward wave but didn't approach for a hug. And Hunter just stared at him with this heartbreaking mix of anger and hope. Dinner was painfully tense. Thomas tried too hard, asking about school and activities like he'd just been gone for a week instead of years. The kids answered politely, but without enthusiasm. I caught Hunter watching us, trying to figure out what was really going on between the adults. After the kids were in bed, Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table and tried to figure out what to do. About Janet, about our marriage, about the future. I told him I wasn't sure I could forgive the lying. Even understanding why he did it, 2 years of deception was a lot to overcome. Thomas said he would do anything to earn back my trust. Go to counseling, transfer back to a job in the States, whatever it took. In the middle of our conversation, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "This is Margaret, your aunt. I need to see Janet's children. Call me." I showed Thomas and his face hardened. He said Aunt Margaret had never once checked on the kids in the 2 years since Janet left them. Not a birthday card, not a phone call, nothing. Now she wanted to see them? It was suspicious timing. The next morning, while Thomas took the kids to school, an awkward but necessary step toward normalcy, I called Margaret. She started with fake pleasantries, then quickly revealed her real purpose. Janet had told her that I had stolen her children, and she wanted to help Janet get them back. I tried to explain the reality, how Janet had abandoned the kids, disappeared for 2 years, and was now in jail for multiple offenses. Margaret refused to believe any of it. In her mind, Janet was the victim, and I was the villain who had somehow manipulated the courts and CPs to steal her sister's children. When I hung up, I was shaking with anger. Thomas came back from the school drop-off looking troubled. He said Hunter had barely spoken to him in the car, and when they arrived at school, Hunter had jumped out without saying goodbye. I wasn't surprised. Hunter had been the one most affected by Thomas's absence, old enough to understand abandonment but too young to process it healthily. That afternoon, I had to work, so Thomas picked the kids up from school and brought them to their therapy appointment. Dr. Morris, their therapist, had agreed to meet Thomas and assess how his return was affecting the children. When I got home from work, Thomas was making dinner with Annie, teaching her how to make pasta sauce from scratch. It was the first time I'd seen any of the kids engage with him willingly since his return. Grace was coloring at the table, occasionally asking Thomas to look at her work, but Hunter was nowhere to be seen. I found him in the bedroom, headphones on, angrily playing a game on his tablet. When I sat on the edge of his bed, he pulled his headphones off and asked me straight out, "Is Thomas staying?" I told him honestly that I didn't know yet, that Thomas and I had a lot to work through, but that none of it was Hunter's fault or responsibility. Hunter just put his headphones back on and turned away from me. The next day was Saturday. Thomas suggested taking the kids to the park, trying to establish some normalcy. It went okay until we ran into one of Hunter's friends and his mom. When she realized who Thomas was, she gave him the coldest look I've ever seen. Later, she texted me asking if I was really taking him back after what he did. Word had gotten around about Thomas's absence, and people had drawn their own conclusions. When we got home, there was a voicemail. Janet wanted to speak with me. Janet sounded different on the phone, subdued. She said she wanted to apologize. That being in jail had made her realize she needed help, that she was going to plead guilty and ask for rehab instead of prison time. She said she would sign away her parental rights if I would just bring the kids to visit her once before she went away for treatment. I didn't believe her sudden change of heart for a second. I told her I would discuss it with my lawyer and hung up. Thomas, who had been listening to my side of the conversation, said it was obviously another manipulation tactic. Janet had never taken responsibility for anything in her life. That night, while Thomas was in the shower, Hunter came to me with tears in his eyes. He asked if we were going to have to see her again, if the court could make us go back to Janet. I held him tight and promised that would never happen. that I was his mom now, legally and forever. He clung to me like he was drowning, and I realized how terrified he still was beneath his tough exterior. Friday morning, I got a call from Scott. Janet was being released. She had accepted a plea deal that included probation, rehab, and a restraining order that kept her away from us and the school. But she would be out, and likely staying with Aunt Margaret. I felt sick. Thomas found me sitting on the bathroom floor, trying not to throw up from anxiety. He sat down next to me, not touching, just being there. He said we would get through this, that he wouldn't leave again, that he would do whatever it took to protect me and the kids. I wasn't sure I believed him yet, but I was too exhausted to fight anymore. I leaned against his shoulder and let myself cry for the first time since he'd returned. That afternoon, I met with my lawyer to discuss next steps. She said that given Janet's criminal record, history of abandonment, and the children's clear attachment to me, her chances of regaining custody were virtually non-existent. But she warned that Janet and Margaret might still cause problems, showing up at school or activities, harassing us on social media, filing frivolous reports with CPS. We discussed the possibility of moving, finding a bigger place in a different school district, farther from where Janet and Margaret lived. It would be disruptive for the kids, but maybe safer in the long run. When I mentioned this to Thomas, he immediately offered to cash in his retirement account to help with the down payment on a house. It was the first practical, tangible offer of support he'd made, and it caught me off guard. Saturday morning, Hunter had a soccer game. Thomas and I took all the kids, trying to maintain their normal routines despite the chaos swirling around us. In the middle of the game, I noticed a woman watching from the far side of the field. She was trying to be inconspicuous, but I recognized her immediately. Aunt Margaret. I pointed her out to Thomas, who immediately walked toward her. I couldn't hear their conversation, but I saw her back away as he approached, then hurry to her car. When he returned, Thomas said he'd made it clear that if she or Janet came near the kids again without court approval, we would file for a restraining order against her too. That night, after the kids were asleep, Thomas and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. I told him I understood why he'd paid Janet's blackmail, that I even understood why he'd kept it secret at first, but I couldn't understand why he'd stayed away for 2 years, leaving me to raise 3 traumatized children alone while he hid in Europe. Thomas broke down completely. He admitted that after a while, the lie had become too big to take back, that he'd convinced himself we were better off without him, that every month he stayed away made it harder to face coming home and admitting what he'd done. I asked him if he'd been with anyone else during those 2 years. He swore he hadn't, that despite the distance and deception, he had never stopped loving me or thinking about the family he'd abandoned. I didn't know if I could forgive him, but I also didn't know if I could raise 3 children alone while fighting off Janet and Margaret without his help. The practical reality was that we needed each other, whatever was left of our marriage. The next morning, Hunter came out of his room while I was making breakfast. Thomas had gone for a run, so it was just the 2 of us. Hunter sat at the counter and asked very seriously if Thomas was staying for good this time. I told him the truth, that Thomas and I were working on our relationship, that we both loved the kids very much, but that I couldn't promise exactly what would happen. What I could promise was that Hunter, Annie, and Grace would stay with me no matter what, that I was their mom now, and nothing would change that. Hunter nodded, then said something that broke my heart and gave me hope at the same time. He said, "I want to call you Mom, but I don't know if I should call him Dad again yet." I told him he could call us whatever felt right to him, that feelings take time to heal and nobody would rush him. When Thomas came back from his run, Hunter actually spoke to him directly for the first time in days. Just asked if he wanted some cereal, but Thomas looked like he'd been given the greatest gift in the world. Monday morning, the principal called. Janet had shown up at the school again, demanding to see the children. She'd been turned away and the police called, but she'd made a scene, screaming that I'd brainwashed her kids and turned them against her. The restraining order violation meant Janet would likely be going to jail again instead of directly to rehab. My lawyer called to confirm this, saying that Janet's erratic behavior was actually strengthening our case for permanent termination of her parental rights. Then I got a text just before midnight from Damien of all people, warning me that Janet had been released on bail again and was telling people she had proof that would destroy me and get her kids back. Last update, I couldn't sleep after Damien's text. What proof could Janet possibly have? Thomas and I stayed up half the night going through every possibility. Had he said something in their messages that could be twisted? Had I made any mistakes in the custody process? Was she just bluffing to cause more chaos? By morning, we were exhausted but no closer to answers. I got the kids ready for school while Thomas made calls to our lawyer. No one had any new information. At drop-off, I noticed a car I didn't recognize idling across from the school. My paranoia was through the roof, so I reported it to the front office. They assured me their security protocols were still in place, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Janet was watching, waiting. I was supposed to be at work, but couldn't focus. Instead, I met Thomas at our lawyer's office to discuss next steps. As we were talking strategy, my phone rang. The school. It wasn't what I feared. Grace had thrown up in class, nothing serious, but I needed to pick her up. Thomas offered to go, but I wasn't ready to add him to the approved pickup list yet. Trust was still fragile. When I arrived, Grace was curled up in the nurse's office looking miserable but not dangerously ill. As I signed her out, the secretary pulled me aside. Janet had called the school again, this time claiming to have medical records showing the children were on medications I wasn't administering properly. It was a complete lie, but the school had to document it. I was furious. Using the children's health as a weapon was a new low, even for Janet. The principal assured me they weren't taking the claims seriously, but I could see the doubt in the secretary's eyes. At home, I tucked Grace into bed and called the pediatrician to document that the kids weren't on any daily medications just in case. Then I called Scott at CPS to report Janet's latest tactic. He sighed, adding it to what was becoming a very thick file. Thomas came back from the lawyer with news. They'd filed an emergency motion to suspend Janet's probation based on the continued harassment. The hearing was set for Friday, just 2 days away. Wednesday night, we got our answer about Janet's proof. Damien called again. He'd met Janet for coffee, pretending to be sympathetic to her cause. She'd shown him what she had, screenshots of messages between Thomas and Janet over the past 2 years, carefully edited to make it look like they were having an affair. The messages were real. Thomas had been communicating with her for the blackmail payments, but Janet had deleted her threats and edited the conversations to change the context completely. She also had bank records showing Thomas's transfers, which she planned to present as support for their relationship. I felt sick, but our lawyer wasn't worried. The full message history on Thomas's phone would easily disprove Janet's claims. The problem was the damage she could do in the meantime by showing these edited screenshots to people who knew us. Thursday morning, my worst fears were confirmed. I woke up to dozens of notifications. Janet had created a public Facebook group where she'd posted her doctored evidence. She'd added neighbors, school parents, even my coworkers. The comments were horrifying. People I thought were friends were expressing shock and sympathy for Janet. Others were calling Thomas disgusting names. It was a nightmare. Thomas looked devastated when I showed him. This was exactly what he'd been paying Janet to prevent for 2 years. Public humiliation and accusations. Now it was happening anyway, and worse than he'd imagined. The kids' school called again. The principal wanted to know if we needed additional support. Hunter had overheard some comments from classmates and gotten into a shouting match defending me. I picked all 3 kids up early. On the drive home, Hunter was quiet until we pulled into our parking spot. Then he asked, "Is what the kids at school are saying true? That Thomas is actually their dad?" It took me a moment to understand what he meant. Janet's edited messages had somehow morphed in the rumor mill to suggest Thomas was Janet's children's biological father. The absurdity would have been laughable if it wasn't so devastating. I sat in the car with them and explained as simply as I could. Janet was saying untrue things because she was upset. Thomas was not their biological father. I was not going to let anyone take them away. We were a family now, no matter what anyone said. That night, as the kids slept, Thomas and I sat at the kitchen table with our laptops, documenting every false claim in Janet's Facebook group. It was grueling, painful work, watching people we knew discuss our private lives based on lies. Thomas found a post where Janet claimed she'd only left the kids temporarily while getting treatment for cancer, a disease she'd never had. Friday morning, we dropped the kids at school, despite their protests, and headed to court. Janet sat on the opposite side of the room looking smug. Aunt Margaret was with her, glaring at us. Our lawyer presented the Facebook group, the continued harassment, the false CPS reports, and the school incidents as evidence that Janet was violating her probation and the restraining order. Janet's court-appointed attorney tried to argue that she was just a mother fighting for her children, but the judge wasn't having it. He had reviewed our full case file, including the 2 years of absence and the children's therapy reports. When it was Janet's turn to speak, she pulled out her phone, saying she wanted to show the judge proof of Thomas's affair with her. The judge stopped her immediately, reminding her that no phones were allowed in his courtroom. When she persisted, he ordered the bailiff to confiscate it. The judge's ruling was clear. Janet had violated her probation and the restraining order. Her bail was revoked, and she was remanded to custody immediately. The Facebook group was to be taken down within 24 hours. Most importantly, the judge granted our motion to expedite the termination of Janet's parental rights, setting a final hearing for just 2 weeks later. She started screaming that I had stolen her life, her children, her future, that Thomas had promised to leave me for her, that we would pay for what we'd done. The next 2 weeks were a blur of moving, settling in, and preparing for the final hearing. The kids started at their new school, where nobody knew our complicated history. Thomas took a local job with a pay cut, but regular hours that let him be home for dinner. The night before the hearing, Hunter asked if he could come to court with us. He wanted to tell the judge himself that he wanted to stay with me. Our lawyer had actually suggested this might be helpful, but only if Hunter genuinely wanted to do it. We agreed he could come, but Annie and Grace would stay with our neighbor at the new house. The judge began by reviewing the case history. He noted Janet's abandonment, the 2-year absence, the children's integration into my care, the multiple restraining order violations, and the recent probation violation. He then asked if Janet had anything to say before he ruled. Janet's transformation was startling. She spoke quietly about making mistakes, about struggling with addiction and poor choices. She said she'd been in therapy in jail and had realized she wasn't ready to be a mother. Tears streaming down her face, she said she just wanted what was best for her children. I felt Hunter tense beside me. This performance was exactly what he feared, that the judge would believe Janet had changed and send them back to her. But then Janet continued. She said she knew the best place for the children was with me, that she was voluntarily terminating her parental rights because she loved them enough to let them go, that she hoped someday when they were grown and she was truly better, they might find it in their hearts to reconnect with her. The judge asked Janet if she understood what she was saying, that terminating her rights was permanent and couldn't be undone later. Janet nodded, saying she understood completely. The judge then turned to Hunter, asking gently if he wanted to say anything. He said he wanted to stay with me, his mom, that he was happy in our new home with his sisters, that he didn't want to be afraid anymore. The judge thanked him for his bravery, then issued his ruling. Janet's parental rights were terminated permanently. My adoption of Hunter, Annie, and Grace was finalized. They were legally, permanently, irrevocably my children. So Reddit, that's it. That's how I fought off my psycho sister. Maybe saved my marriage. Jury's still out on that one TBH, and got my happy ending. Or at least as happy as real life gets. To the people who commented on my previous posts saying I should just give the kids back to Janet when she returned, are you kidding me? These children are people, not library books you can return when you're done with them. And to everyone who DM'd me saying I was destroying a mother's bond with her children, she destroyed that bond herself when she abandoned them for 2 years to party with her teenage boyfriend. Special shout out to users who gave me amazing advice about documentation and custody hearings. You guys literally changed our lives. I know some of you will say I should have divorced Thomas immediately, and maybe past me would have agreed, but real life is messy. People fuck up, even good people. Sometimes you have to decide what matters most and fight for it. For me, that was these 3 amazing kids who now call me mom. And that pregnancy Janet claimed? Total lie. Shocking. Absolutely no one. Thanks for coming on this wild ride with me, Reddit. I might not update again unless something major happens.